The suffocating heat of the Tucson cemetery seemed to burn away my last bit of strength. I am Eleanor, 36 years old, standing completely numb while watching the small casket lower into the ground. My hands trembled uncontrollably when I pulled out my phone to send one final message into our main family group chat. My 10-year-old son Ezekiel has passed away. Please come say your final goodbyes to him today. I waited in the dead silence for any sign of comfort or basic empathy from the people who raised me. A few moments later, a notification popped up on the screen from my mother, Edith. I opened the text hoping for some sympathy, but her response completely froze my heart. "We are currently on our vacation. Please do not make things so dramatic right now." I stared at those words while the reality of their total indifference finally shattered my remaining illusions about blood relations. They completely ignored the death of my child while happily spending the money I worked so hard to provide. That exact night, I sat alone in my dark living room making the most important decision of my entire life. I permanently blocked their access to every shared bank account they had continuously relied on for the past decade. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone screen displayed 547 missed calls. They were about to learn exactly what happens when the person they exploit finally decides to close the bank vault forever. Please stay with me until the very end of this story to see how everything unfolded. Remember to comment your city below, so I know exactly how far my journey of taking back control has reached. Returning to the completely empty house on the afternoon directly following the funeral service, I collapsed onto the cold living room floor, with the phone still tightly clutched in my hand. Staring blankly at the completely emotionless message from Mom, forbidding me from making a scene, a bitter realization began washing over my exhausted mind. Their deliberate absence today was not some unfortunate scheduling conflict, but rather a perfect reflection of their deeply callous nature. Painful memories immediately flooded back of those endless sleepless nights, sitting alone inside the sterile hospital room while Ezekiel fought for his next breath. During all those terrifying weeks of medical emergencies, not a single person from my biological family ever bothered to visit or even call to check on the deteriorating health of my precious child. They always claimed they were too busy with their important schedules to drive out to the pediatric cardiology wing, despite living only 30 minutes away. That deafening silence contrasted sharply with their usual relentless persistence whenever they needed me to open my wallet for their selfish desires. My sister Melissa would call me multiple times a day demanding immediate funds whenever she wanted to book an exclusive spa retreat. She never hesitated to interrupt my highly critical work meetings if her credit card unexpectedly declined at some luxury boutique downtown. Similarly, my brother Alexander constantly pressured me for massive wire transfers to cover the mounting personal debts caused by his recklessly extravagant lifestyle. He would leave incredibly long voicemails begging for emergency bailouts whenever his lavish party habits finally caught up with his perpetually empty bank account. Every single time they demanded financial rescue, I complied without question, because I mistakenly believed my unwavering generosity would eventually earn their genuine love. The cruel reality laid itself bare right before my tearful eyes in the quiet isolation of my shadowy living room. For the past 10 years, they merely viewed my existence as a convenient automated teller machine rather than a grieving mother desperately needing emotional support. They happily extracted the fruits of my grueling labor while completely ignoring the beautiful little boy who constituted my entire world. Whenever I tried sharing updates about the upcoming heart surgeries or the experimental medications, they would quickly change the subject back to their superficial problems. The absolute agony of permanently losing my only flesh and blood now rapidly mutated into a profound and chilling awakening deep within my soul. I had foolishly allowed myself to be ruthlessly exploited for over a decade because I desperately craved the comforting illusion of a supportive family. My blind loyalty had actively funded their luxurious vacations, while I sat shivering in uncomfortable hospital chairs eating stale vending machine sandwiches. Understanding the sheer magnitude of their betrayal finally shattered the heavy chains of guilt that had always bound me to their toxic financial demands. They deliberately chose to abandon a grieving mother during the absolute darkest moment of her life, simply because attending a funeral would ruin their leisure time. There would be no more apologies or desperate attempts to win the affection of individuals who viewed my tragedy as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. Wiping the final tears from my face, I gathered every ounce of remaining strength to accept the devastating truth about the people sharing my DNA. They never loved me or cared about the survival of my son, as long as the cash kept flowing seamlessly into their checking accounts. That particular night seemed absolutely endless as I sat huddled on the floor of my son's bedroom while tightly clutching the very last photograph we ever took together. A massive wave of suffocating guilt crashed over my exhausted body when I realized how many precious hours I had wasted working overtime. I had foolishly dedicated my entire life to funding the lavish lifestyles of Melissa and Alexander, instead of being fully present with Ezekiel during his declining health. My mind replayed all those weekends I spent answering urgent emails to pay for their luxury expenses, while my little boy quietly played alone in his hospital bed. I actively sacrificed the peace of my own small household just to buy some fake validation from emotional parasites who never actually cared about our well-being. Mom had always conditioned me to believe that financial generosity was my only valuable trait within our deeply flawed family dynamic. Now I clearly understood that my relentless financial sacrifices merely enabled their toxic behavior while robbing my dying child of his mother's undivided attention. Every single dollar I transferred to cover their luxurious habits was a unit of energy stolen directly from the limited time I had left with Ezekiel. Staring at the innocent smile captured in the glossy photograph finally broke the invisible chains of obligation that had controlled me since childhood. I am so incredibly sorry for letting those selfish people drain our strength for so long, but everything is completely finished now. I whispered to his picture between choked sobs. Carefully placing the wooden frame back onto his nightstand gave me a sudden surge of adrenaline mixed with pure, righteous anger. I slowly stood up from the carpeted floor with a newfound sense of clarity guiding my every movement toward the wooden desk in the corner of the room. Opening my laptop screen illuminated the dark space as I navigated directly to the main portal of my primary banking institution. I decided to manually terminate their entire access to the shared funds right then, without allowing myself another second of useless hesitation. The screen loaded multiple joint accounts displaying the exact amounts Melissa and Alexander had already scheduled to transfer for their upcoming bills. Clicking the Security Management tab allowed me to instantly select every single authorized user attached to my hard-earned wealth. Revoking the permissions for Mom took an extra layer of determination because she had always been the primary architect of my lifelong financial subservience. Starting from this exact moment tonight, nobody has the right to exploit us ever again, I told myself firmly while moving the cursor over the final confirmation button. I pressed the key with absolute conviction to permanently lock all secondary cards connected to my vast financial network. The banking website immediately generated a green notification confirming that the drastic security modifications were successfully applied across all active platforms. Revoking their privileges felt like excising a malignant tumor that had been slowly poisoning my existence for the past decade. There would be no warning messages or gentle explanations provided to any of them regarding this permanent severing of our financial ties. They would wake up tomorrow in their expensive resorts, completely cut off from the endless money supply they took for granted. This decisive action marked the crucial turning point where I officially reclaimed my dignity to honor the sacred memory of my beautiful son. I closed the laptop cover, feeling an unexpected wave of profound relief, washing away the heavy burden of my previous pointless sacrifices. Exactly at 8 o'clock the following morning, my mobile phone resting on the kitchen counter began vibrating incessantly to signal the furious storm approaching from their expensive vacation resort. A massive flood of frantic voicemails from Melissa quickly filled my notification screen as her tone violently shifted from initial confusion over declined credit cards to absolute unhinged rage. She spent several agonizing minutes aggressively cursing through the speaker while attempting to blame me entirely for intentionally ruining their perfectly planned luxury getaway under the tropical sun. Alexander immediately followed her dramatic outburst by sending massive paragraphs of highly manipulative text messages specifically designed to twist my perspective and force my immediate compliance. He continuously weaponized minor events from our distant past to falsely manufacture a deep sense of obligation within my heavily grieving mind. Reading his desperate attempts to guilt-trip me only solidified my resolve, because his words completely lacked any genuine affection or authentic familial connection. Listening to their unhinged digital temper tantrums revealed the most devastating reality about their true priorities during my absolute darkest hour. Not a single text message or frantic voicemail contained even a fleeting word of comfort regarding the heartbreaking funeral I had just attended completely alone yesterday afternoon. Every single sentence they aggressively typed or screamed revolved exclusively around their suddenly inaccessible funds and their heavily bruised public egos. "You owe us after everything this family has done for you." Melissa practically shrieked into the receiver with unprecedented bitterness over losing her primary source of wealth. Her venomous words echoed through the quiet kitchen, while clearly demonstrating that she viewed my lifelong financial support as an obligatory tax rather than an act of profound generosity. Mom eventually joined the coordinated digital assault by leaving a heavily condescending voicemail demanding that I stop acting like a selfish teenager and restore their purchasing power immediately. She complained bitterly about the sheer embarrassment of having her premium resort card rejected in front of affluent strangers at the hotel breakfast buffet. Her primary concern remained firmly fixed on her social status, instead of addressing the massive void left by the permanent departure of her only grandson. "What kind of crazy game are you playing right now? Unlock the accounts immediately before things go too far." Alexander texted shortly after with a blatantly threatening tone. His aggressive demand further highlighted their shared delusion that I somehow existed solely to fund their irresponsible life choices without ever questioning their authority. My complete refusal to engage with their escalating madness only fueled their desperate attempts to regain control over my heavily protected financial resources. Watching their collective meltdown unfold on my glowing screen provided the ultimate absolute proof I desperately needed to justify my severe actions from the previous night. The exact moment their unearned economic privileges were forcefully stripped away, the fragile facade of our familial bond shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I quietly placed the ringing device face down on the polished marble countertop, while allowing their toxic desperation to echo meaninglessly against the walls of my silent home. Their coordinated campaign of emotional manipulation would never again work on a mother who had already survived the absolute worst emotional tragedy imaginable. The deafening silence I offered in response to their chaotic demands became my ultimate declaration of total independence from their parasitic grip. Approximately 5 days after the solemn funeral service concluded, the familiar loud roar of an expensive car engine aggressively parking outside my front door clearly signaled the sudden arrival of highly uninvited guests. Melissa and Alexander barged straight into my quiet living room without even bothering to knock or ask for basic permission to enter my private sanctuary. Their sudden physical intrusion was not driven entirely by the shocking realization that their endless financial supply had been permanently terminated overnight. They were visibly panicking because the firmly blocked bank accounts proved they were permanently losing their lifelong psychological control over my entire existence. They immediately attempted to aggressively redirect the ongoing narrative by desperately playing the pathetic role of innocent victims who were being treated horribly by an unstable sibling. They loudly paced across the carpeted floor while repeatedly accusing me of being a completely cold-blooded monster for unilaterally severing our sacred family ties without providing any proper warning or reasonable explanation. Their raised voices echoed through the hallway as they aggressively demanded full restoration of their revoked banking privileges before things escalated into a massive legal dispute. Instead of cowering in the corner or apologizing like I usually did during our past arguments, I faced their chaotic negative energy with a terrifyingly absolute calmness. I stood perfectly still without shedding a single tear while watching them throw their ridiculous adult tantrums right in the middle of my grieving space. Every single ounce of my previous emotional weakness and desperate need for their fake validation had completely evaporated from my tired soul, leaving behind only pure, unbreakable steel. You two are currently on your vacation, so please do not make things so dramatic right now, I calmly stated while looking directly into their panicking eyes and repeating the exact cruel message Mom had sent me on that tragic day. The shocking realization that I was boldly weaponizing their own heartless words against them instantly silenced their incredibly loud and aggressive shouting match. They stared at me with their mouths hanging slightly open, while visibly struggling to formulate another manipulative response to regain their lost upper hand. The heavy silence filling the bright living room proved that my newfound emotional armor was completely impenetrable against their usual guilt-tripping tactics. They had foolishly assumed I would eventually break down weeping and beg for their toxic forgiveness, just to restore the fragile illusion of our broken family unit. I am no longer the endless gold mine for you to ruthlessly exploit, so get out of my house immediately, I firmly declared while pointing my index finger straight toward the open front door with absolute uncompromising decisiveness. They awkwardly shuffled their feet while realizing their highly coordinated intimidation tactics had completely failed to break my hardened resolve or trigger any lingering self-doubt within my mind. My resolute action of physically demanding them to vacate my private property marked the permanent and completely unhealable rupture of our highly toxic biological relationship. I stood confidently in the doorway, watching them stumble backward toward their luxury vehicle with expressions of pure defeat plastered across their incredibly flushed faces. Slamming the heavy wooden door shut behind their retreating figures successfully established an impenetrable boundary of permanent protection around the sacred home, holding all the beautiful, cherished memories of my departed child. 6 quiet weeks slowly passed before the previously aggressive individuals decided to completely change their manipulation tactics after realizing my unwavering seriousness. My digital inbox suddenly started overflowing with highly calculated messages, carrying a fake submissive tone, specifically designed to target my lingering compassion. They shamelessly fabricated countless ridiculous excuses, attempting to justify their completely heartless behavior during the absolute darkest period of my entire life. Melissa initiated this new psychological campaign by sending lengthy paragraphs reminiscing about completely manufactured childhood memories to falsely portray us as deeply connected. She desperately wanted to reset the narrative back to a harmonious state where her endless financial exploitation could resume without any consequences. I really miss you because we are still a family, so please let us just move past everything together, Melissa texted with a sickening level of superficial sweetness. Her transparent attempt at reconciliation felt incredibly insulting because it completely ignored the massive emotional destruction her previous actions had previously caused. She typed those hollow words expecting me to instantly forget the brutal rejection I experienced standing alone beside that small wooden casket. Alexander followed her exact blueprint by sending equally disingenuous emails claiming he had undergone a profound personal transformation during our brief separation. He entirely avoided taking any genuine accountability for his aggressive demands, instead blaming his recent hostility on severe work-related stress. He wrote extensive passages detailing his fake struggles to evoke sympathy, while conveniently ignoring the massive debts he expected me to blindly pay. Mom eventually contributed to this highly coordinated offensive by leaving a desperately awkward voicemail, attempting to rewrite the reality of her unforgivable absence. Everyone always cares about you deeply, but it is just that we have all been way too busy lately. Mom claimed while desperately trying to mask her previous cruelty. Listening to her forced tone through the phone speaker sent a literal shiver of revulsion down my spine due to the sheer hypocrisy. Reading through dozens of these pathetic begging messages slowly revealed a horrifying pattern that completely solidified my decision to walk away forever. Through all their desperate attempts to regain access to my bank accounts, they entirely omitted the most important aspect of my current reality. Absolutely none of these selfish individuals ever bothered to mention Ezekiel by his beautiful name or acknowledge the devastating grief consuming my soul. They carefully crafted their manipulative apologies without ever referencing the deceased little boy who used to consider them his loving relatives. Their deliberate refusal to acknowledge the death of my precious 10-year-old son proved beyond any doubt that he never truly existed within their minds. They were merely trying to pacify a broken automated teller machine rather than attempting to comfort a deeply mourning mother dealing with unimaginable tragedy. That specific realization felt like a rusted blade twisting deliberately into my deepest emotional wounds while simultaneously curing me of any remaining guilt. The absolute erasure of my child from their convenient apologies disgusted me on a visceral level, completely eradicating any microscopic chance of future reconciliation. I permanently blocked every single one of their contact numbers to ensure my sacred healing process would never again be interrupted by their toxic presence. They clearly proved they were incapable of human empathy, so I officially erased them from the remaining chapters of my quiet existence. One foggy weekend afternoon, I finally gathered enough courage to slowly open the wooden door leading directly into the childhood bedroom of Ezekiel. The faint, lingering scent of clinical hospital sanitizer immediately greeted my senses, while I stepped cautiously across the familiar blue carpet toward his neatly made bed. I stood completely alone in the center of the room, surrounded by countless precious belongings representing a beautiful life that was tragically cut way too short by his terminal illness. My trembling fingers carefully touched his tiny folded hospital gowns before tracing the colorful crayon strokes of his unfinished imaginative drawings scattered across the desk. Every single object inside this quiet sanctuary carried a massive emotional weight, documenting the quiet bravery of a child facing an impossible medical battle. While systematically emptying a plastic storage bin filled with scattered toy blocks, I noticed a neatly folded piece of white notebook paper hidden beneath an old cardboard Lego box. Unfolding the slightly wrinkled sheet revealed several short sentences written in his distinctively shaky handwriting from his final grueling days at the pediatric cardiology ward. Those precious handwritten words contained absolutely no resentment regarding my constant absence, but instead overflowed with pure, unconditional love for his perpetually busy mother. Please do not be sad when I am gone, because I will always love you the most in the entire world. The innocent message read, with devastating clarity. Reading that selfless declaration of pure affection instantly demolished every single emotional wall I had frantically built to properly contain my overwhelming grief. I collapsed onto his small bed while clutching the priceless letter tightly against my chest as heavy sobs violently wrecked my exhausted physical body. The deafening silence of the empty house absorbed my agonizing cries, while I wept for all the irreplaceable moments forever stolen by my greedy relatives. I promise to live the rest of my life wonderfully just for you, my sweet angel. I whispered fiercely through my uncontrollable pouring tears. Holding that fragile piece of lined paper surprisingly transformed my suffocating despair into an incredibly powerful source of unexpected and permanent inner strength. That intense emotional explosion successfully completed a profound spiritual cleansing process deeply within my previously burdened and manipulated soul. I clearly understood that permanently banishing those toxic relatives from my existence was actually the ultimate tribute to properly honor the pure love Ezekiel unconditionally gave me. He spent his final fleeting moments worrying about my future happiness instead of complaining about the cruel unfairness of his own terminal diagnosis. His beautiful written blessing completely eradicated any lingering doubts I held regarding the absolute necessity of my severe actions toward those emotional parasites. Wiping my tear-stained cheeks, I carefully placed his final letter inside my shirt pocket to keep his comforting presence physically close to my healing heart. The incredible contrast between his selfless childhood innocence and the repulsive greed of grown adults provided all the moral justification I would ever need. Slowly packing the remaining childhood items into sturdy cardboard boxes no longer felt like a morbid, agonizing duty, but rather a necessary step toward my newly reclaimed psychological freedom. The oppressive darkness that had heavily clouded my judgment for an entire decade finally began lifting to reveal a quiet path toward genuine emotional recovery. I locked the bedroom door behind me, feeling remarkably lighter because the heavy chains of misplaced family loyalty were finally broken beyond any possible repair. Exactly 1 entire year has passed since my entire world collapsed, yet I woke up today, welcoming the warm morning sunlight through my bedroom window, with a completely transformed, peaceful mindset. The mobile phone that previously served as a constant source of profound anxiety now sits perfectly silent on my nightstand without displaying any manipulative text messages. There are absolutely no frantic missed calls from greedy individuals demanding emergency funds to support their reckless financial habits. The profound silence filling my home initially felt incredibly hollow during the early stages of my grieving process, but it eventually transformed into the ultimate manifestation of absolute personal freedom. Waking up every single day without anticipating another manufactured family crisis has provided me with a level of priceless tranquility I never thought possible. The surrounding neighborhood remains beautifully quiet as I pour my morning coffee, while embracing the wonderful reality that my home is truly my secure sanctuary. Escaping those completely unreasonable financial obligations finally allowed me to successfully reclaim total ownership over my own destiny. I deliberately utilized the agonizing pain of losing Ezekiel to construct an impenetrable emotional boundary that permanently shields my heart from further exploitation. I successfully redirected all the energy previously wasted on toxic relatives toward honoring the beautiful memory of my precious son through meaningful charitable contributions. Rebuilding my life from the shattered pieces of my broken trust proved that walking away from abusive blood relations is sometimes the only path toward genuine survival. Every breath I take now feels completely unburdened because I no longer carry the heavy weight of their endless expectations upon my tired shoulders. I have finally learned how to exist purely for myself while keeping the pure love of my child securely locked inside my healing heart. This audio production represents our channel's ongoing commitment to providing highly educational stories regarding the critical importance of establishing firm personal boundaries. We aim to clearly demonstrate how individuals can successfully handle severe family crises by utilizing pure logic alongside protective legal measures. Evaluating the unfolding situation objectively reveals how the female protagonist effectively protected her own psychological well-being by initiating a permanent, uncompromising separation from her toxic relatives. The deeply manipulative antagonists ultimately suffered the inevitable devastating legal consequences, directly resulting from their own terribly selfish choices alongside their endless financial greed. Looking back at this incredibly dark journey reveals several profoundly important lessons about successfully navigating extremely toxic family dynamics to protect your peace. You must absolutely never attempt to purchase genuine love or authentic familial loyalty through unconditional financial concessions, because selfish individuals will always exploit your deepest emotional vulnerabilities. Establishing impenetrable personal boundaries while actively refusing unreasonable toxic demands is never a cruel act of selfishness, but rather a mandatory requirement for ensuring your continuous psychological survival. True family is never determined by empty biological connections, but is instead built entirely upon mutual respect, alongside unwavering emotional support during the absolute darkest moments of your entire life. I send my most sincere gratitude to the patient listeners who stayed with me until the very end of this emotional story. Embracing every single moment of complete silence carries its own uniquely powerful strength for personal healing. How would you handle this devastating situation if you were placed in my exact position? Please share your honest perspectives regarding establishing personal boundaries in the comments section down below.